Hi, everyone, and welcome back to another episode of the Data Center Exchange. Now, today I'm joined by somebody who's, I would say, is a bit of an industry OG, somebody who has over 25 years experience in the data center industry, holding positions such as COO of T5 data centers, through to his current position as president of Base Partners, an advisory firm advising investors on platform investments, developers, and data center service companies as well. So, as we know, the industry has changed significantly over the years, as most industries in the 25 years our guest has been in the industry, but maybe no more than data centers. And I really wanted to explore that concept, just how has the industry evolved and changed from the point they entered to where they are today. So, as we always do on the podcast, we always take a bit of a dive into your background and to your career history. So, always keen to know kind of how you got into the industry and where did it all start for you, and how have you got to this point today?
Yeah. Gotta go way back for this one. So in the 90s, got into commercial real estate out of university, and we started seeing some requirements for technology real estate, we'll call it, with switch space, MCI, Nextel, and some of the very early data center companies. So, Savvis and Digital Island and Exodus and groups like that. And being in the Bay Area, I'm based out of San Francisco. We got a fair share of those requirements, and there was a lot of activity going on here, and just really fell into it. So started advising those companies on site selection and acquisition. In the early days, it was all about the fiber maps. We didn't know, you couldn't get the fiber maps. You had to have a buddy in the industry who would give you something, and you would try and figure out, okay, where are we going to site select? And we'd try and be main and main on fiber, and then everything else came after that. We would convert office buildings, we'd convert warehouses. There were storage buildings, 200 Paul in San Francisco, for example, multi-story storage building that got converted into data center. And then you just call up the utility and say, hey, we need, whatever it is, which was de minimis, which is, nothing compared to what it is today. And they'd come and drop a transformer or two, and there you'd have a data center. So got into it through the advisory side of the business, site selecting, and then in 2006 jumped over to development, hung my own shingle, and started on a project in Los Angeles. Was our first project, built the team, and ultimately merged up with the T5 guys in Atlanta. We all came from the same background at the Staubach company. And so at that point, they had Atlanta and Charlotte, I had Los Angeles, and we kind of brought that together to be a coast to coast organization.
Very good. A long history in the industry. But then fast forward to what you're up to now, Base Partners, as I mentioned in the introduction. Can you give us a little
Yeah.
insight into what you're up to? I know you probably can't reveal too much, but can you give us a bit of an insight?
Yeah, by all means. There are a number of new entrants in every facet of data centers, obviously, right? From operators, developers, land speculators, investors. And so I've been spending the past couple of years working mostly with investors on making smart investment decisions as it relates to the data center sector. So evaluating opportunities both on the equity side and on the debt side, and for PropCo, property investments as well as operating company investments, which has been fun. I've always been on the other side of the table requesting capital. And so now I sit with the guys who have the capital and help allocate it and make smart investments. So also helping some operators, fundraise and find capital, matchmaking for those guys as well.
Yeah. Okay. Very interesting. And I imagine varying what you're doing on a day-to-day basis.
Yeah, it's a lot of balls in the air, which is fun. Looking at a lot of projects, I've had the benefit of being able to see a lot of the business models that are out there right now, what people are pursuing and where they think they can create value. And it's across the board, as you would imagine. We're seeing everything from edge ideas to carrier hotel ideas to massive powered land, all the stories we read about down in Texas and other places. And everyone's got their own spin on where they think the industry is going and how they can add some value and create opportunity within it. So seeing a wide swath and then trying to narrow those things down into what's the right match for the investment group.
Yeah, sounds interesting. And I before we deep dive into today's kind of topic and looking at how the industry's evolved, I bumped into you at PTC, which was great. How was your trip to Hawaii? I know you sailed to Hawaii actually, don't you? Which we'll come on to maybe in a little bit. But how was
I
PTC?
Yeah,
How was
not
PTC?
this January, but I
Not
have in
this
the past,
January.
and yeah, we'll continue to do that. So, yeah, PTC. I hope that they're able to keep it in Hawaii. It's gotten so large. I think we've kind of swamped Waikiki, and several thousand people this year who attended, and then several thousand who actually didn't sign up, but were in Hawaii for meetings. And so, it's one of the great gathering spots for our industry, and it's always good fun. It's some people I only see in person at PTC like you. So anyway, it was a great show, and I hope everybody who's listening got a chance or will get a chance to go there. It's worth the effort, especially I know it's a long ways for some folks coming from Europe and Asia Pac, but it's worth it.
It is worth it, and I echo what you said about. I really do hope, maybe for selfish reasons, but I really do hope that the location of Hawaii there is a very relaxed feel to it, and people are really happy to engage and talk, and yeah, it's well worth the trip, as you say. Moving on to the
Yeah.
industry and how it's evolved. We've heard how you entered the industry some 25 years ago. So I'm going to ask you quite generally to start with, how has it evolved? How much has and have things changed across the data center industry?
Yeah, I mean, where to start on an open-ended question like that? In some ways, everything's changed, and in some ways, it's still the same as it ever was. It's unpredictable. It's fast changing. We view it now that we're in the normal um, flow of capital and attention. We think it's going to be more mature and kind of more predictable, and it's not, right? We see news stories every single day where things are changing quickly. DeepSeek, or yesterday was Microsoft announcing, or not announcing, but a story about how Microsoft is pulling back. So things are changing, and they always have. And that's the one thing that's been interesting about this industry, is that you never know what you're going to get. And so you can come up with a business plan that will take multiple years to execute, right? Now we're talking about, 5 years to get power. And so you have to come up with a business plan today, yet it won't be fully realized for over half a decade. Yet the industry is always changing, and things will change in that amount of time. But obviously the scale is massive, right? We're talking about not just the size of the data centers and the power that it's drawing, but the capital that's going into it is on a scale that it was unthinkable a few years ago. The attention that the sector is getting, and I don't think we do a great job of addressing the concerns of the communities in which we build. Right, we hear a lot of stories about areas where they're just pushing back, individuals and communities getting organized and saying, we don't want any more data centers. We haven't done a great job of messaging how important these facilities are, and how integrated they are into our day-to-day lives right now. So, that piece, we're getting a lot of stories in the Wall Street Journal, right? We're getting a lot of, just focus. So it's been a rocky road. It's been a fun road, but ultimately it still gets down to some fundamentals. You still need connectivity. You still need power. It's still real estate. You're still buying a bunch of land. You're still getting entitlements. You still have utilities that come in, other utilities, water and sewer and things like that. So bouncing around a little bit here, but it has a lot of the same flavors, but just a lot bigger and a lot more interesting and a lot more players. I mean, we've really grown as an industry with the number of folks who are involved. And so we've got a number of industrial organizations now that are pivoting and saying, "Hey, I've got land holdings. Could this work for data center?" We've got, all sorts of different operating companies that are coming in trying to divvy up. Again, as I mentioned, is it a network play? Is it an edge play? And those are all new people coming in, and so there's fresh blood and fresh ideas, but there's also hard lessons being learned.
Yeah. So it's interesting that, as you say, some of the principles haven't changed in terms of, the entitlements and the site selection. But obviously we know that there's many facets of the industry that have hugely evolved. In I'm assuming the technology that data centers kind of, within the data center themselves have evolved hugely since you first started your involvement in the industry. Can you give us a bit of an insight into, for people that maybe don't know, who are interested in that, just how much that aspect of the industry has evolved?
Yeah, I think the easiest way to explain it is just the power density. What we're putting into these data centers has changed dramatically. I mean, there used to be, tape in data centers, right? The old banks would, um, and now what we're talking about, we used to build data centers to 100 watts a square foot of power, critical power. And then, these days, if you're looking at a cloud deployment, you may be 350 to 400. But obviously, what's going on with NVIDIA and the AI deployments, you're talking multiples of that. And so we're getting to the point where, obviously the cooling system, the topology has changed dramatically. So we need to be able to have liquid cooling. Air cooling is just, it can't handle it anymore. And so, luckily we've learned a lot along the way as well about closed loop systems. And so we're not using as much water on new designs. And that's really important for every community, but especially when you think about, Texas and Phoenix and, major markets where they're constrained on certain elements. And so, the bones of the data center, it's the physical, it's the electrical, and it's the mechanical. And we've definitely modified and improved and escalated those components, but it's still the data center is still those components, right? The bones of it are still the same. It may be improved, it may be more efficient, it may be better, maybe more dense with all the technology on the chip side, the server side, but it's still kind of the same thing.
Yeah. So the product itself is that, has that changed a huge amount as well?
Just the scale of it for the
Yeah.
most part.
Okay.
I mean,
Yeah.
the scale is absolutely massive. Obviously, finding the power is the long pole in the tent now, right? We hear stories about that all the time. You need to build on-site substations. We were doing that, 15 years ago as well, but it was relatively small footprints and within a system that you could tap into that would be able to deliver a certain amount of power. Now we're talking about, generation issues. We're talking about transmission issues, and then of course distribution issues. So it's just a massively different scale than it was.
Yeah. Yeah. And then moving on to kind of the customers, because, organizations like Meta didn't exist back when kind of you entered the industry yourself. How has the customer landscape changed in that period? Their
Yeah.
demands and the nature of the customer.
It obviously we had a lot of customer concentration into the hyperscalers. So, you can count on two hands, basically the majority of demand these days. And, that started with certain applications that would be outsourced to the cloud. And then, it became more acceptable and then enterprises, for the most part, offloading a majority of their applications, if not all of them. We still have enterprise out there, obviously, and there's great business to be had working for enterprises. I hear lots of stories coming out of the community of, this bank or that enterprise looking for 10 or 15 megawatts and having a lot of trouble finding footprints in that size because most of the new data centers are much larger and operators don't want to break up their data centers for multi-tenant. But those are good credit customers and obviously pricing is very appealing when you look at the enterprise world. So we've basically concentrated into a number of hyperscalers who, they're your customer, but they're also your competition. They're self-developing where they can. They'd like to get to, a ratio of 50% self-develop, or some have even stated more. which is challenging for them to do, and they can't always do it, which keeps us all in business. But they have a lot of power, they have a lot of control, and they have a lot of options, and so those relationships have been absolutely critical to the success of most of the operators out there. So you have to be able to work with hyperscalers. You have to have MSAs with them. You have to have a relationship with them and kind of figure out where they're going to need capacity and get ahead of them. Otherwise, they'll do it themselves. Now we're seeing a new breed of AI companies come in, the OpenAIs, the CoreWeaves, Crusoes, those guys. And I think it's early days. A lot of excitement, a lot of press. We'll see where that all goes. Obviously, training can go to geographies, West Texas, for example, or lots of new locations where historically we haven't had data centers. And I'm very curious to see how that all plays out, especially as it relates to construction and operations. It's pretty challenging when you're 3 hours away from a metro to find all those people, find the right talent and get them there. But you've probably got some experience in trying to hire those folks, right? Um, so, again, it consolidates and then new players come in and it changes and we pivot and we adapt.
Yeah, you mentioned talent there. I mean that's clearly a challenge of this industry and many growing industries out there as well. But I'm keen to explore the challenges you mentioned in the introduction. I think about power wasn't the kind of challenge back then that it is now, but how have the challenges changed and evolved over that period? Power being the one that everybody has, probably for the last couple of years has been talking about. So
Yeah.
how does that look now compared to then?
Yeah, I mean, it's power is the number one issue. I think everybody's been speaking broadly about it and specifically about changing the system. The grid can't keep up, and therefore, cogeneration, self-generation, natural gas. We're seeing a number of providers build generation on site, either as a bridge or potentially as longer. So there's been a lot of attention on that front. There's also, air quality. So generators, capacity that we can build, that impacts if you're going to build a natural gas plant, as well as diesel secondary energy plants. You have, as we mentioned, pushback from the local communities. That's a big challenge. You have staffing and training, right? On the construction side, we're building like we've never built as an industry, and so there are only so many electricians, right? There are only so many people that you can pull in, and so trying to find those qualified uh, contractors and subcontractors has been a real challenge. And then operators. It's amazing how small the world is when you talk about facility management and operations and things like that. There just aren't that many players. There are the big, real estate houses, CBRE, Jones Lang, et cetera. And then there are some specialty groups, but you need people to operate these data centers. We haven't figured out a way to get around staffing them and maintaining them. And so that's a real strain on the industry and real challenge to growth. I mean, historically, we've gone to community colleges and tried to support, classes in data center operations, just trying to build up that next generation of capable people. And that's what you have to do these days, just to find the opportunities to staff up your data center. So I worry about that, especially when you're talking about non-core markets. How are we going to get those folks in West Texas?
Yeah, I do worry about the construction, the facilities aspect, jobs that, are huge jobs that are and skills that are in huge demand across all areas of the world, but probably, dare I say, aren't really the industries of choice for many people leaving colleges now. I don't know if you feel that and that's not sort of talking disparagingly about the industries themselves. There's some unbelievable careers in all of those areas, but I just think, dare I say it, the sexier industries to pursue and kind of skills to pursue with younger people for today.
Yeah, fair. I would also say that maybe we haven't done a good enough job of promoting the industry and the opportunities. The things that we've always historically worked on as enticements to bringing people on are training and upward mobility, right? And so if you can learn new skills and therefore have the ability to move around. And if those skills are transferable, then you've always got that in your back pocket. And then people want to know that, it's not just wage growth, but promotions and, advancement, career advancement. So I'm not sure that we've, as an industry, done a great job of convincing, a generation of younger folks that this is a way to learn new skills and really be capable, and make good money, make a good living, and grow and be promoted.
Yeah, I totally agree. I think that's the root cause, and talking about construction and generally, I think there's a challenge in how young people perceive that industry as an industry of choice. I think many different industries can do a lot of work in highlighting the benefits of a career in construction and facilities and engineering. And
Yeah.
then, as you say, you've got the data center industry that is by design invisible. I've said that a lot on this podcast before. Um, I think it's doing better than it used to do, but there's so much more that we can do to make it an industry of choice for people and to open the door a little bit for
Yeah.
to let younger people see just the amazing careers and journey that you can have.
Yeah. Agreed.
Yeah. And in terms of the industry, and because I think when you consider the industry as part of the wider real estate ecosystem, I think, is it fair to say it's kind of always been on the side and seen very much as a specialist industry that you can't tap into? But would you say it's kind of evolved in a way that it's well, how does it fit as part of the ecosystem now, would you say?
Yeah, I think it's yeah, for the vast majority of time that data centers have been in the real estate world, it was a specialty, niche. It was not standard and not one of the major flavor groups, so to speak. So, but I do think that's changed. The past few years, we're seeing that, LPs are going out saying, "Hey, what's your digital game plan here? How are you getting into the space?" And we're seeing a lot of folks that historically were nervous about it, trying to get in, and that means different things. Taking on SLA risk and turnkey leases, the dollars are bigger, the risk is bigger. You really need to understand the space a little bit better. So we're seeing, the industrial guys, for example, who are trying to get in and start platforms or convert their existing locations, would rather do powered shell than turnkey for the most part, right? And so it's a stepping stone. So the greater real estate community is embracing data centers in various ways, and different levels. On the capital side, we're seeing a lot of attention being put to it, right? It's been one of the few growth sectors in real estate over the past few years. And so getting a lot of attention, again, varied degrees of education and risk exposure. But it kind of feels like we finally earned our seat at the table.
Yeah. And I guess for those trying to crack into it, you mentioned about, sort of the capital required and it's still very much a niche in many ways. How accessible is it for those that want to diversify and even today it seems to improve, but realistically, how accessible is it?
Yeah, I think you need to look at it holistically that, all the attention you get huge projects that get the attention and the stories in the Wall Street Journal and OpenAI and things like that. But the industry is pretty deep as it relates to all the different flavors of it. There's a lot of edge activity that goes on. There's still a lot of co-location that goes on. One of my theories is that stick with tier one markets because inference will again drive people back to population centers and network dense centers. And sometimes, you can't get a 200 or 300 megawatt opportunity in some of these markets. It's spent, so you got to go smaller. And so there are opportunities to jump in at a price point that is less. Recently helped a group buy into a project that was about 15 megawatts in the Atlanta market. It's going to be a great facility. It's a rebuild of an existing legacy data center that's going to be repurposed for higher density and for today's uses. And so the capital doesn't have to be in the, billions of dollars. There are lots of opportunities to get in at different price points.
Yeah, no, it's good to know. And wanted to also touch on, because you mentioned a couple of times the challenges that the industry has in terms of how data centers are viewed by communities,
Hmm.
and some of the reluctance to accept more data centers in certain areas. How do you feel the industry, or how was it back in the day when you first entered the industry? That's kind of, how did people
Yeah.
perceive data centers, and how do you feel the industry is doing now in terms of trying to educate communities and, you know, um, highlighting the positive impact data centers have on everyday life?
Yeah. Back in the day, nobody knew what a data center was.
Yeah,
So it was a warehouse with a lot of security as far as they were concerned. And so it really didn't impact things. But there are lots of stories of moratoriums put on data center development, Amsterdam and Singapore, and communities like Hillsborough, Oregon, where I've done a lot of work and I would love to do more up there. They view their land as a scarce resource. And they want more jobs to go with that land. So they want high tech manufacturing, or they want something that is going to be different than a warehouse full of servers as they perceive it. I don't think that we've done enough to demonstrate two components. Number one is how many jobs are actually associated with data center development, because it's an ecosystem that's much larger than I think people understand. They look at the end state of that data center and say, okay, there's 25 or 40 employees in that facility. And if it were a different use case, there could be 300 employees. So you're losing that. What you don't really understand is, all the vendors that maintain all that equipment, that are third party, that come and go every single day, all the IT folks that come and go every single day, all the construction people that it took to build that in the first place, all the design and engineering that went into it. There's an entire ecosystem. And again, you mentioned secrecy. And I think that's part of it, is that we don't really show how it all works, right? And how big the ecosystem is. And so I think we haven't done a good job of explaining that there are a lot of really high paying jobs that go with the data center world and our development. And that's one of the key pieces. I mean, these are higher than average paying jobs. And so, it's different than a distribution center where, you may have a lower wage scale. Second, beyond just the number of jobs is the impact on your life, right? Everybody loves to have Amazon deliver tomorrow morning when you need something, right? Everybody, we have these phones that we can't put down and we're looking at constantly, and it's how business gets done now. And so, what are we going to go back to? Are we going to, basically unplug everything and not have data centers? So everyone loves the benefit. If they don't understand it, they love, having technology impact their lives. There's a little bit of a, hey, we don't want it in our backyard, which I understand. Um, I guess a third component would be that I think we've done a really good job of mitigating a lot of the impact that data centers have. Noise is one of the big complaints, right? And so we always have to do noise studies to make sure that, at the property line, we're below 100 decibels and things like that. Emissions, obviously, vary by location, but pretty strict these days on emissions, right? And so, I think we're a very clean industry, generally speaking, as it relates to that, and obviously all the initiatives of the hyperscalers and operators to get down to net zero. And so I think we've paid attention to a lot of the factors that would impact a community, but maybe we haven't explained what we've done well enough.
Yeah, I think I don't know many industries that have changed everyday life so much in the last kind of 20 odd years. I'm sure
Yeah.
there are. I'm sure people listening to this will correct me, but I just don't know how well when you often read reports about energy consumption and X% of the world's electricity now sort of, are used by data centers, you think, okay, yeah, I mean, I know we've got to be aware of those facts and those aspects, but when you put that alongside how it's changed everyday life, I think, it's kind of amazing what the industry has achieved and the impact that it's had.
Well, and on that note, you talk about electricity and obviously data centers. We draw more in the afternoon when it's hot, and our cooling systems need more capacity. But our baseline, 70% or 75% or 80% baseline, which is perfect for utilities, right? So, what really messes up utilities is the ebb and flow of consumption within a day and within a season. And that's why they need so many peaker plants. That's why all these old coal plants are staying online. So that hot afternoon in July, there's enough capacity to run everybody's air conditioners. Data centers, we keep drawing the same amount of power for our servers 24/7, and it really stabilizes the grid. So we get a bad knock for we're stealing all the electricity, and we're raising rates for everybody. But there are some plus components to this as well, that we really do stabilize the grid, and it's reliable. A utility makes an investment in infrastructure, whether that's generation or transmission, and they've got a reliable customer that's a very steady revenue stream for them on the other side.
And I imagine this the whole sustainability aspect of the industry, the focus, the investment in that is just, I mean, I'm not necessarily in, I serve the industry. I'm not necessarily in it day to day, and I'm not an engineer, but you just read some of the initiatives and the investment in that area. It's huge. It's significant. The industry does care.
Yeah, it does care, and it's having trouble with that right now. I mean, there are challenges to meeting the obligations that they've set out, but they're not going away. It's not like, we've all thrown in the towel on clean energy and net carbon. So, it's hard to execute when, again, we can't take those coal plants offline, or if natural gas is going to be the majority of new generation over the next few years until we transition to something better. But we're
Mm,
still working towards that, which, yeah,
yeah.
name the other industry that's working so hard to be green.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. 100% agree. We've obviously spent some time looking back a little bit and how things have changed. What about looking forward now in terms of what are the challenge? What does the industry look like in 10 years' time, do you think? And I know that's incredibly difficult to answer given how rapidly things evolve and change, but
Yeah.
what are your thoughts on that with the emergence of AI in the last kind of 18 months, 2 years?
Yeah, it's I just know it won't be what I think it's going to be. How about that? Um, I don't know about 10 years. I think we'll definitely have other energy solutions, small modular reactors and things like that, right? Local generation, cogen. I think there's a huge push to go that direction, and so resolving our grid issues is going to be a huge component. Look, I think I heard one of the big data center groups on their earnings call recently call inference cloud 2.0, right? And so it's coming back to the eyeballs and the consumers and the enterprise and network centric locations. And so I think we're pivoting away from, the very rural massive projects, and we'll continue to develop in core markets, right? And those core markets will grow, and we'll add new core markets. But it's a little bit of the same, the pendulum swings, and we go back to, okay, we need to be close to the consumers, and we need to be focused in on geography like that. So I think, look, the technology is just outrageous right now. What's happening, and trying to keep up all the new models and everything that's going on, and trying to read between the lines. What does this translate to? Nvidia sells so many chips. What's that turn into as far as megawatts of data center space? So we obviously are growing dramatically, and we'll have our ups and downs. But I do think that the core fundamentals are still going to be, look, this is basically technology within real estate, and now we're adding in the electricity, the power consumption, and so it's that interchange of those three things, right? It has been to certain degrees, and will continue to be so for the foreseeable future.
Yeah, and how did AI change the landscape? When I went to PTC for the first time in kind of 2022 or 23, I don't think AI was discussed anywhere near. I don't think it was really discussed a huge amount. Certainly not in the circles I was sort of socializing within that point. But how has that changed the landscape of the industry? Looking forward.
Yeah, I mean, it's obviously the new exciting uh, you know, flavor, if you want to call it that. But we still have cloud. I mean, cloud's still growing in a big kegger. We still have enterprise. We still have network. We still have edge. We still have, think about like, Waymo and Uber and all the things that are going to be out on the edge, right? It's an additive component to the data center world, a big one with a lot of attention, but it doesn't take away from everything else that's still growing. And so it gets a lot of the attention, like I said, but ultimately, it's on top of everything else that's already happening. And, we go through these phases. We had during COVID, Zoom, and everyone was consuming at home, and there was a big growth spurt there. And then when that waned, everything slowed down, and we thought, okay, we're getting back to normal. And then AI pops up, and this has been the biggest wave that we've ever been through. I'm sure things will revert back, but that's a fundamental component. Those data centers are still going to be used, and they're still going to consume electricity, and they're still going to have customers in there paying rent, and they're still going to need operations teams, and they're still going to need construction when you got to replace equipment or densify or modify or expand. So the ecosystem is growing so dramatically, and it'll just keep compounding on top of that.
Yeah, it is such a dynamic industry to be in. And last couple of questions before we wrap up. I'm
Yeah.
always keen to know what you enjoy most about being a part of the industry, Aaron, yourself.
Yeah, great question. It is never boring. So it's always very interesting. The people you meet, the folks who have been in it for a long time, those long-standing relationships, a lot of them are obviously still in the business, and then a bunch of new people coming in with all new ideas. It's very exciting. Everyone feels like, we're on the cusp of something fantastic, and we're part of something fantastic. And so the energy is great, right? And you feel like you're on the bleeding edge. And you still don't know what that's all going to mean. And, any event, we have small events that become big, waves in our industry. A analyst report comes out, and all of a sudden, NVIDIA drops 5% or whatever, right? I mean, we're still very reactive to things, which makes it pretty exciting and pretty interesting.
Yeah, absolutely. You mentioned something there that I love about the industry, and that's kind of the relationships that you form. You read so many stories about investment and the figures are crazy, and but I can see within it there's just a really strong sense of community. People do support each other. People genuinely stay in touch. It's quite old school in that respect. There's a lot of, it's very relationship driven, I would say.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. And it'll be interesting as we grow, can we hold on to that camaraderie? But so far so good. I guess if we get to go to Hawaii every year, we'll
Well,
rekindle it.
yeah, I mean that is probably the backbone of the relationship building in the industry, and long may that continue. The last question I will always try and ask every guest is, most people I've spoken to haven't set out to sort of work in the digital infrastructure industry, or they've kind of fallen into it, or opportunistic, however you want to call it. Had
Mhm.
that have not happened to you, what would you be doing now, do you think?
Oh, great question. I think I'd still be trying to sling office space as a commercial broker, most
Yeah.
likely. But yeah, but I haven't had to think about that for a while. So anyway, I've been lucky enough to be focused in on this. So real estate's at my core. I always loved it. But this sector, this piece of real estate is as I mentioned, ever changing and always exciting. So I'm
Yeah.
lucky to have ended up where I'm at.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, look, Aaron, I really appreciate you joining me today, giving the listeners some insight into how the industry's changed, and just being an advocate of the industry as well. I think we need these kind of conversations. I think to just shine a light on the industry, and make people really feel it's if they're listening to it, it's an industry of choice, or just learning more about it if you're already in it. So I really appreciate you illustrating your journey and giving us your insights today. And Aaron, thank you very much.
Yeah. Well, thank you much, Dal. Really enjoyed it.